Welcome to a new year and a continuation of our show host series on our YouTube channel. This year we'll probably depart a little bit from just talking to show hosts, and we will get into some of the more strategic parts of podcasting because there's so many new opportunities and nuances and strategies for podcasting this year. But I'm still going to call it the show host series for now because if you're a show host, this will be very helpful info for you. And what I want to cover for our first video of 2024 is kind of the forecasts for the year that all the industry experts have made, and also kind of what worked best last year in the midst of so much change, in the midst of so many great shows and studios kind of pulling back or canceling or shifting their economics and thinking about like how podcasting is kind of ending in one way and beginning in a new way. And so I want to kind of give you the lay of the land for this coming year and what everybody thinks is going to be the most successful path for podcasters this year, kind of what worked best last year, where we can capitalize the most this year. So just as a brief recap, if you are like, what are you talking about? What changed in 2023? The quick version is the economics of podcasting changed pretty dramatically last year. And this is mostly talking about big network shows and studio shows where the biggest money is, the most advertising dollars go. But essentially, some of the best made shows that had the most budget behind them and won all the awards were canceled because the numbers didn't make sense anymore to make them the way that they had been made in the past. Like they couldn't make enough money because marketing costs have increased and there's way more high quality shows in the pool now for people to listen from. So getting audience share was more challenging. And so there's kind of a big shakeup because the economics of the whole industry kind of had hit a tipping point. And we're like, we can't keep making shows the way we used to, and because they're not profitable, but more people than ever are listening to podcasts. There is more advertising money going into podcasting than ever before. But there's so many more shows out there that are trying to get a slice of that advertising revenue and trying to get a slice of audience's ears. And so everyone's kind of coming into this year in the world of podcasting, like show hosts and podcast studios and producers are starting to be like, how do we actually make shows that are profitable and sustainable, that, are making better and better shows, that are making more amazing content for audiences, but actually can be sustainable, like from an economic point of view. And if you're listening and you're a show host who's a personal brand, who isn't trying to be a big studio show, who isn't trying to bring in advertising dollars today, then some of this may feel like a little above you. But I want you to be really informed about like the bigger forces at work within the industry, because it does ultimately affect who else you're competing with for audience attention and how your monetization options will evolve going forward. So the best predictions for this year about how to make a great show that people will listen to and share and will kind of command the most attention, which ultimately ends up being the most dollars in advertising revenue, is to focus on niche audiences and kind of niche topics, because naturally there is an audience already there if you're speaking to a niche topic. We talked about that on other videos in our series. But there's kind of another layer you can add to it now, because the data is getting better and better at listener behavior and viewer behavior. You can now make a really niche show or season or episode within your topic, and you can actually just think of it like old school, like where are the people who would want to listen to this episode? Where are they already hanging out? What other shows are they listening to? What other publications are they reading? What newsletters? What websites do they go to? What social media accounts do they follow? Because it's just as effective as ever to make a really great piece of content, like a podcast season or podcast episode, and then go put it in front of the people who you know are looking for that kind of content. In the past, it was a bit more tempting to just focus on building your own audience and being, through marketing dollars or what have you, kind of attracting the people to your show. And what's kind of shifted this year, and it's almost like going back to old strategies that still work, is because there are so many new shows constantly being put in front of podcast listeners, it's much harder to be found. Instead, it's much more strategic to take your season, episode, show, and go put it in front of the people who would already be interested. So instead of expecting them to come to you, go to them. And that comes through relationships. That comes from reaching out to editors and account owners and newsletter writers and all the people in your space who you know have the audience attention that you're trying to get. Be like, hey, how can we do a collaboration? How can we do a partnership? Would this be of interest to your audience? Like, how can I make this easy for you to share? That is like a timeless piece of marketing wisdom, but it's really where people are focused this year, because if you just expect people to find your podcast because you're making a podcast and it's out there in the podcast world, like it's just not happening anymore. There's just so many more shows that are really good, not just like crappy amateur shows, like really good, really professional shows that there's just like impossible for podcast audiences to find you naturally if you're just relying on like podcast channels or your own social media accounts or something like that. So that's kind of tip number one. Kind of go to the old school marketing strategy and make really, really good content for a niche audience and then go put it in front of them where they already are. That could be through getting featured on the really popular social media accounts in your space. Could be through getting featured on the email newsletters, maybe the magazines or the online publications, Obviously, live events are a very effective way. If you go to a conference or a summit or a live event that is gathering the people who are interested in the niche of your show, like go try to either sponsor it or get featured in the program or be on stage or have a moment where people can get it. Like, oh, this is the show host of the show that I would like to listen to because I'm into this topic and here they are. Okay, that's kind of tip number one that a lot of podcasting companies are going to be focused on. Tip number two is that last year, one of the best ways podcast producers got really good shows made was by making sure that their teams, like the production team, had the opportunity to make really cool experiences within the podcast episodes. So that might be video, that might be audio. There's all kinds of cool stuff that happened last year with sound design, these immersive experiences, like having really high quality audio, but also like using beautiful music and sound effects and thinking about the pacing of, the episode. This is a little more applicable if you're doing narrative style episodes versus chat shows. And at Worthful Media, we typically talk more about how the chat shows work. But you can take creative inspiration from the narrative style shows and bring that into your chat show. So maybe you play around with some of the editing styles if you have budget to pay your production team to do a little bit more in that department. Maybe you invest in some more on-brand music or better music, or you get custom music made. Maybe you make an extra effort with your audio quality. Maybe you start going to a studio or you upgrade your home studio. And that can go for video and audio, right? Those kinds of upgrades definitely make a difference. They're not the most important thing to focus on, but if you've kind of already done some of the other stuff and you're trying to stand out, like investing in better production, whether that's on the editing side or the recording side, totally makes a difference, because audiences are becoming so much more used to having really beautiful episodes put in front of them. So if you're kind of just doing amateur hour still, it's not as captivating. The third tip that is coming from the industry experts, whether it's something that worked really well last year or something that they think is going to be very effective this year, is to get much more savvy about how your audience is listening or watching. And that's because the technology has gotten way better to track listener and viewer behavior. Back in the early days of podcasting, there was like literally no way to track anything. It was like just kind of flying blind. The only metric you really had was like how many people clicked play on your audio file, which didn't say much. So there's a lot more tools now, and they're getting developed rapidly to be able to learn way more about your audience behavior, which helps you understand who they are, what they like, what they're interested in. And so some of these tools are kind of still only available to enterprise level shows, like that, big studio networks that are paying the bucks for these fancy schmancy tools. So I wouldn't recommend like going to all of them and investing in all of them. And it depends on the size of your show. But I want you to take the principle of that and think a lot smartly, whether you upgrade your analytics on your hosting service for your podcast so you can see more details about listener behavior, where they are, when they're listening, how much of an episode they're listening to, it's a certain day of the week or a certain part of the world or the country, different cities. You can go into your Spotify podcast account and kind of see even more demographic data like gender and age. It's helpful to think not just about downloads, but also like how many people are listening who are repeat subscribers versus brand new people who are not subscribers. There's like levels now to what you can see about your audience. It's also helpful to use third-party tools like Rephonic. Rephonic.com is a really helpful tool we recommend to a lot of clients. If your show's been out for a little while, like 6 months or more, you can look it up on Rephonic and you can start to see what other shows your audience is listening to. Like you can kind of start to get a better idea of like where your show lives in people's minds and what other shows they're listening to. It kind of helps you understand like the ecosystem of content that your audience is also engaging with as far as podcasting goes. It's very helpful on YouTube if you have your show over there to go through your YouTube analytics. There's a lot of data in your YouTube analytics that if you've never looked at can be very insightful. Obviously, a YouTube audience is a little different than a podcast audience, but there might be crossover and then there might be some unique things about your YouTube audience that will help you understand how to make better content for them. So one of the best ways in 2024 to kind of make a better show, grow your audience more, kind of make the best of this chapter of podcasting is to really understand your audience. And some of that can just come from the simple, asking for feedback, following up with questions when people send you comments, being like, hey, where are you listening from? What do you like about the show? What other stuff are you interested in? Like, get to know your audience, whether that's like people you meet in person who tell you they listen or DMs you get or emails or texts. It's super valuable, no matter who you are as a podcaster, to understand the audience that's listening or watching and what you can do to serve them more of what they want. So I'll wrap it there with those 3 kind of best tips that I've been hearing as I've been reading all the industry forecasts and all the like best practices from 2023. Those would be my top 3 tips to keep in mind no matter what level of podcaster you are. And it will obviously be a big year for podcasting for a lot of reasons. There will be a lot of shifting and changing, but there's also like way more opportunity in a lot of ways than there's ever been. So I hope you're feeling excited and hopeful about this medium, especially if you're entering into it kind of for the first time or you're new to it. It's a really cool time to enter in. I would definitely come in with fresh eyes and not just focus on what you've heard other people say in the past or seen maybe your friends do in past years. Like things are quite a bit different now. So I'd come in with a fresh perspective, just start educating yourself now. Obviously, subscribe to our channel because we are going to be sending you weekly videos with more insights and tips. And if you have specific questions you want us to cover that relate to podcasting, show hosting, production, audience development, just leave a comment on the video and we'll cover it in a future episode.